Paranatural Podcast. My name is Ben.
And I'm John Daly.
You are not John Daly. You're Jake. And tonight, we're going to talk about a 1924 incident involving some very naughty big feats. The attack at Ape Canyon. Jacob, how you doing tonight, buddy?
Yeah. How do you know I'm not John Daly?
Because I can see your face.
Oh. Well, the listeners can't.
They can hear your voice. That's a little more John Daly.
I gotta slur it a little bit more.
You gotta talk about golf and drinking.
I have his autograph.
Do you?
I do.
That's impressive. What's it on?
A magazine.
Oh,
Went to the Buick Open in 2004.
The Buick Open?
Mm-hmm. How are you?
I'm okay.
No.
I'm okay.
Oh, also, everyone, happy Thanksgiving.
Yeah. Hope you're full of turkey.
And whatever disease it has that makes you tired.
Tryptophan.
Yeah.
I think I still have tryptophan in me because I've been napping for the last 2 days.
I think tryptophan works like caffeine for me.
Well, lucky fucking you.
So naughty big feats, you say?
Yes, naughty big feats. Ready to get into it?
Meaning there's more than one?
Yes.
Gasp.
Bigfoot's, or as they're referred to throughout this particular story, ape-men.
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 Do you think someone got it on with a really big, like, silverback?
No.
Because what I think of Bigfoot is like an Andre the Giant looking motherfucker got it on with a big old monkey, and yeah.
So just because we're here, in Soviet Russia, they did try experiments like that in order to make soldiers. They tried to mate women and various ape species. It was, according to all records, not a successful experiment.
Didn't they try that with pigs too?
I don't know. Wouldn't surprise me.
I'm gonna have to look that up. Maybe there's a pig human cryptid hybrid thing out there.
Man bear pig.
Don't even joke about man bear pig. Get Al Gore on this thing. He'll tell you all about it.
Okay, then. I don't think I want Al Gore on my podcast.
Why not? Save the cryptids. Save the world.
Yeah, okay. Now we're back to fucking heroes. Anyway. So, when it comes to the story of the attack at Ape Canyon, there's part of it that is fairly well known amongst Bigfoot enthusiasts, and that is the account of the attack itself, which I will get into here in just a minute for anybody who hasn't heard of it. But what is lesser known and vastly less talked about are the events that led up to the attack, which I will be getting into all of that as well. So we're doing the whole goddamn story here. Now, there is a couple of things I want to cover real quick just to clear things up. So the first is the location of Ape Canyon, which is a deep, narrow canyon that runs along the Plains of Abraham on the southeast shoulder of Mount St. Helens. So that's in Washington State. For anybody who doesn't know, it's a volcano, and it blowed up in the 80s. But anyway, this was way before then. And that is where, in July of 1924, 5 miners had an encounter that would go down in history and give the canyon its name. Which leads us to the second thing. The most detailed and full account of events comes from Fred Beck, who was one of the 5 miners. In a quote-unquote book called I Fought the Ape-Men of Mount St. Helens, Fred narrates his story, which is then written down by his son, Ronald. Now, in the book, quote-unquote, Fred does not name the men who were with him. He claims that this is out of respect for the men and their families, as the others had wanted to distance themselves from the story. So this happened in 24, and the book came out, again, quote-unquote book, because it's more like a pamphlet, really. It's real fucking short. There's not a lot to it, but that came out in 67, I think, something like that. So quite a few years later. The men's names, however, are known, and they're known from the initial newspaper stories that came out where they did do interviews and they said who they were and all that shit. So the men, along with Fred Beck, are Gabe Lefave, John Peterson, Marion Smith, and Marion's son, Roy. So those were the names of the actual people. But in his book, Fred uses the pseudonym Hank. And he says it is a pseudonym for one of the men. And since Hank is the only one spoken about, I guess we are to assume that the others were pretty much worthless and didn't do shit. So, because he really only talks about Hank and says Hank is just one guy. Fred begins his account by saying that they had been prospecting in the Mount St. Helens and Lewis River areas of southwestern Washington state for about 6 years. Over the course of those years, they had, from time to time, come across large tracks near creek beds and springs. The largest of these tracks measured 19 inches long. Now, for reference, Shaquille O'Neal, who's like 7'1" and weighs 300 pounds, has about a 16-inch long foot. So that's just for reference. Yes.
Nothing.
Okay.
Thought he was heavier than that.
He probably is now. But when he was in...
Yeah, I thought he was closer to 400.
When he was in playing shape, he was over 300, but I think he was like 325 or something. The Hank, according to Fred, was a bit nervous about those tracks. He was an experienced woodsman, and he knew that those were not made by any known animal, and they were fucking huge. So they made him a little bit nervous. So it was the middle of July, 1924, and the men were working their gold claim, which they called the Vander White. They had received a good assay on the claim and were excited about the prospect of the wealth to come. Fred recalls that he had had a toothache and asked Hank to take him to town to see a dentist, but Hank was so enthused about the gold that he refused. Since they had all come in Hank's car, Fred just had to tough it out. Poor fucking guy, stuck on a goddamn mountain with a toothache. Now, he said it was hurting so bad that he couldn't even eat dinner, which was beans and hotcakes, so he really wasn't missing much, but still, poor guy couldn't even eat his dinner.
What do you mean he's not missing much?
From beans and hotcakes?
Okay. The beans are all right, but the hotcakes? You know, every American will say they're pancakes, but...
Well, they were known as hotcakes back then. And either way, I'm not a fan.
I love them, especially with some peanut butter. Ooh, sprinkle some sugar on there.
Well, they probably didn't have peanut butter or sugar. They were up a fucking mountain.
Who doesn't always carry peanut butter and sugar on them?
They were out in the dang wilderness.
I always have peanut butter and sugar with me out in the wilderness.
And it was 1924. Remember the stuff that fucking Albert Ostman took into the mountains? Same year. Probably the same kind of shit.
Tack, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was hard tack, and that guy was so hungry he was hoping for some porcupine stew. He was so tired of fucking pancakes and bullshit.
Yeah, Porcupine's good.
Porky stew. If you haven't listened to the Albert Ostman episode, go back. Snatched by Sam Squance. It's a fucking great episode.
Great episode. Isn't that one of the ones that are on YouTube?
Yes.
I think it is.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Porkies.
Porky stew. Anyway, it wasn't just Hank that was all gung-ho about the gold. Like, the entire group was fucking excited. And they were all so determined to get to the gold that they had been ignoring some pretty strange noises for about a week. In the evenings, they could hear loud, shrill whistles. And the whistles would come like from a ridge on one side of their camp, and then they would hear an answering call from another. They would also hear a booming, thumping noise, like something beating on its chest. So, you know, kind of like gorillas will do. Now, they weren't entirely stupid and didn't fully ignore the potential threat that came with these strange sounds. They did take certain precautions and implemented kind of a buddy system. So they were no longer going out, especially at night, alone, which is, you know, at least that's something. It's better than nothing. So that's why Hank, during this particular night, asks Fred to go with him to get some water from the spring, and must have been feeling particularly nervous because he suggested that they take their rifles along just in case. And they do just that and walk down to the spring, which is about 100 yards away from the cabin. Suddenly, Hank lets out a yell and shoulders his rifle. And in that same instant, Fred saw what Hank saw. And according to Fred, it was a hairy creature, about 7 feet tall, and covered with blackish brown hair. It was standing across the canyon next to a pine tree about 100 yards away. Now, having been spotted, the creature ducked behind the tree. But then it fucked up, and it peeked out from around the tree trunk. Hank was ready, and the instant the creature peeked, he fired 3 shots. Fred said he saw the bark fly off the tree, and the creature disappeared from view for a few moments, but then reappeared about 200 yards away down the canyon. It was running fast and running upright. Fred winged a few shots at it, and then it was gone. Yes.
Everything's 7 foot tall.
Everything. They're always 7 feet tall.
So, I got a question.
Yes.
It peeked out from behind the tree, and he fired off 3 shots.
Yes.
It was 1924.
Mhm.
What kind of rifle? Weren't they all single shots back then?
No, not in 24.
No.
They
had semi-auto.
Yeah, well, they had semi-auto. They had lever action.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know what caliber it was, but Fred does say that Hank was carrying a Remington semi-auto rifle, and he himself was carrying a lever action 30-30.
Okay, so they're trying to take its head off.
So, I mean, 30-30 is not, the biggest caliber, but it'll get the job done.
Put a nice hole in something.
Yeah. Anything up to about black bear size, it can do the job.
Yeah. Or Bigfoot size, 7 foot tall.
Yeah.
Like everything else.
They estimate that they were about 400 pounds. So 30-30 is adequate.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's bigger than a black bear, but
not by a lot.
No, not by a lot. By like a foot, maybe a half a foot.
And 100 pounds, give or take.
Yeah.
For a big black bear.
Post hibernation weight.
Yeah. I mean, 30-30 is, I would want something bigger if I could get it, but
I mean, realistically, if I only had a 22, I'd still feel safer.
Yeah, better than nothing.
Something yeah. Enough to scare it off.
Yeah.
Moved in a couple of seconds, 200 yards.
Well, he says a few moments, a few minutes, a short while.
Oh.
Who knows how long it really was, but yeah. It was moving fast.
Did they say how close it was when he first fired at it?
100 yards.
100
roughly.
yards?
Yeah, roughly.
With a rifle?
Yeah.
It was probably iron sights back then.
I would assume, yes.
That's a pretty tough shot.
Yeah, I mean, if you're shooting just at like its eyes to the top of its head, it's coming on towards nighttime, trying to shoot fast.
I'm sure you're gonna answer this in the story, but is it one of the cone-shaped ones? Cone-shaped nuggets?
They actually never say. Not specifically.
Okay.
But I kind of assume.
Alrighty. I'm done with my questions for now.
All right. So after Fred wings a few shots at it, they get the water and they go back to the cabin and tell the others about what happened. As a group, they decided to leave the next morning, only waiting because they didn't want to hike back to the car in the dark. So the car wasn't really near their cabin. They had to leave the car and hike up to the cabin. There weren't roads and shit up the mountain right back then. After they make this decision, eventually the men settled down and went to sleep, only to be woken around midnight by the sound of something heavy hitting the cabin, and by Hank cussing and kicking and waving his rifle around. Because whatever had hit the cabin had knocked some of the chinking loose, and it was all over Hank. Now, just for those who don't know, chinking is the shit they put between logs in log cabins to cover up the gaps in the logs. And it's made of
what I would have guessed.
It's made of sand and clay and a mixture of shit, and then it's smeared in there.
Insulation.
No, it's not really insulation. It literally just fills in the gaps.
I mean, that insulates to a point.
I guess to a point, but anyway. So Fred helps brush Hank off from all the chinking and shit, and suddenly they heard a commotion outside. And it sounded like a great number of feet trampling over the pile of unused shakes that had been left from building the cabin. Shakes are what they use to make the roof, like slats and shit. At this point, the attack began in earnest. The creatures attempted all manner of assault tactics. They threw rocks, slammed themselves into and beat on the cabin walls, and even pushed up against the building as if trying to push it over. The cabin, though, was quite sturdy in its construction, and the attacks had very minimal effect. The rocks, which were not huge in the area, mostly just bounced off with a thud. A few made it down the chimney and landed harmlessly into the fireplace. The running into and beating on the walls knocked more of the chinking loose, but had no effect on the logs themselves or on the stability of the walls. And the cabin proved too heavy to budge, let alone tip over. So all these things we're managing to do is kind of make a mess, really, at that point.
Assholes.
Now, there were a couple of oh shit moments for the group, though. One was when the creatures got up on the roof, and the men, knowing that the roof was much weaker than the walls, just poured bullets into the ceiling until the creatures got the fuck down. Another was when one of the creatures slammed into the door so hard that they saw the wood bow in and it nearly gave way. And the door was made out of like half logs, like stitched together. So they was hitting it pretty fucking hard.
Yeah.
But when they saw that the door almost gave way, they took one of the long poles off the side of the bed and like braced it against the door, which shored up that weak point a little better. The other oh shit moment was when one of the creatures reached in through a gap between the logs and grabbed a hold of an axe. And it began to pull the axe out, but Fred thought quickly and grabbed the axe head and turned it straight up and down, which caused it to kind of get stuck for a second, which was long enough for Hank to fire through the gap, and he almost hit Fred's fingers, and the creature let go. And after that, Fred pulled the axe back in and put it in a safer, more out-of-reach place. Now, I'm just going to pause right there and say these guys they might have made a very sturdy cabin, but they did not make a very precise fucking cabin.
Yeah.
There is no reason that the space between the logs should have been big enough for them to fucking shoot through, let alone a fucking Bigfoot to put his goddamn arm through, okay? You guys need to get your shit together and learn to fucking level some logs, all right? Come on.
Yeah, honestly, you want to scare him off or something, I would have just held on to the end of the axe where his arm's still inside and fire a few rounds into that.
I mean, that's kind of what they did, but... Well, its hand, it had to hold the end of the handle, and it got it pulled back through before Fred could turn it, and then Hank just shot through the opening, which is what they did pretty much the whole night. Whenever they were firing, they were shooting through the spaces between the logs where the chinking fell out, and they were watching through there. And except for those instances, the men felt relatively safe because the cabin wasn't moving. Like,
right.
You know, they were pretty safe in there. And so they decided to only shoot when the cabin was actually under direct attack. First off, that saves ammo.
Yeah.
And second, they hoped that the creatures would get the hint that the men were only defending themselves. And then once they got that hint, they would go the fuck away. Right?
As ammo consumption is that was a pretty big topic in the Hopkinsville Kelly Hopkinsville Goblins.
Yeah. But they fired like over
fired
200 rounds.
Ton. Yeah.
I don't remember this didn't say how many rounds in total they fired, but they decided to only fire when they were under direct attack. Now, Hank at one point even began singing, "If you leave us alone, we'll leave you alone and we'll all go home in the morning," in hopes that the mountain devils, as he called them, would understand and go away. And he was not doing this as a joke. He actually hoped they would understand and go away.
Yeah. I'd try anything.
I mean, yeah, it's worth it, right? At that point. Now, the creatures may not have understood. They may not have cared. Or Hank may have been a really horrible singer. Whatever the case, the attacks continued until just before daylight. When there was enough light to see, the men came cautiously out of the cabin and looked around. Very quickly, Fred spotted one of the creatures standing at the edge of Ape Canyon about 80 yards away. All night, they had only fired when attacked, just when it was necessary for defense. Fred threw that shit right out the window and opened fire on the big furry bastard. He shot 3 times, and the creature toppled over the edge of the cliff and down into the gorge about 400 feet below. Hank, realizing that that was probably a mistake, suggested that they leave their supplies and just get the fuck out of there. The others agreed, and they left over $200 worth of supplies behind.
Which back then, that's a lot.
Yeah, we're talking mining tools and blasting powder and dynamite and all your mining equipment. They just said, fuck this. They grabbed what they could carry in their pack sacks and they left. Now, on the way back to town, Fred got everyone to agree to shut the fuck up about what happened. They all agreed to shut the fuck up. But it wasn't long before somebody spilled the beans. Because that's kind of how this shit goes. Local reporters showed up, followed by reporters from Seattle and Portland. According to Beck, a big game hunter from England came to his house to ask some questions, and this man was carrying with him an elephant gun.
2 gauge.
That's what Fred said. It was an elephant gun. Who knows what it really was? People flocked to the area on an ape hunt, and the story became so well known that the canyon would become known as Ape Canyon. So there is the story of the actual initial attack. Jacob, what are your thoughts, sir?
I really wish they would have went back and tried to find Mr. Toppled over.
They did.
400-foot ape. Did they?
Many people went and looked for bodies or something. And it is mentioned later on, but they didn't find anything.
No glow-in-the-dark blood?
No, nothing.
Huh.
No glow-in-the-dark blood, no regular blood, no Bigfoot bodies, no...
Bigfoot fecals?
Allegedly, they found some tracks, and that was about it.
Where's your allegedly button?
Allegedly.
There we go. Now I know it's true.
Now, so just for shits and giggles, before I get on to some of the other stuff in Fred's book, I'm going to offer the debunkers version of what happened that night. Okay, so it's going to be very Kelly Hopkinsville reminiscent. Ready?
Deal.
So according to the debunkers, it was an owl. No, I'm fucking kidding. I'm kidding. They didn't say it was owl. What they did say was that in the area where their cabin was, and I say in the area, I mean like a couple miles away, there was think Boy Scout camp, but it wasn't Boy Scouts. It was like a youth camp. And they claim that it was the kids from that camp fucking with the miners.
Open fire on some youth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Fucking really? Now, look, I could see a group of kids at a camp fucking with some other people out in the woods. Not going to deny that. But they're going to stop when the first gunshot goes off.
Oh, absolutely.
Whether somebody gets hit or not, they're going to fucking stop.
Yep.
They're going to run the fuck away.
Holler.
Yeah.
Holler like we're humans.
Right. They're going to do something besides continue attacking.
Yeah.
And so it was dark out. They're firing through gaps in the logs. So I'm not saying that any of them would have been precision shooting at the time, but they were also at extraordinarily close ranges. We're talking about the distance of a wall separating you. You're going to hit something. So where's the dead kids?
Got carried off by Bigfoots.
Don't tell my lawyer we kill people, man.
Where's the dead fucking kids? So I call bullshit on their debunking theory. Anyway.
Yeah, the owl's more legit than that.
I mean, right? Be real hard to shoot an owl in them circumstances, but then again, I don't think an owl is going to reach through the fucking wall and grab your axe either.
You think a kid's going to slam into a door made like that and bow it over?
Maybe a real big kid.
This is 1924. Obesity wasn't a thing.
Real giant ass kid. But yeah, that's about the only, other than hoax, that's about the only thing people can come up with to even explain it. And I'm calling bullshit
Calling bullshit on what?
on that it being kids.
So do you think it happened?
I have no reason to think it didn't. I mean, yes, like in his book, Fred didn't name the others, which is kind of suspicious, but the fucking newspapers of the time did.
Right.
You know, these people wanted to distance themselves from it in the 40 some odd years between the initial encounter and Fred writing his book. And I understand that. Like, I can get behind that. They never came out and said it didn't happen, but they just didn't want to talk about it anymore. But the initial newspaper articles had all these men saying the shit happened. And that area is well known for Bigfoot activity, just FYI.
Yeah, Washington State.
Mount St. Helens specifically. I mean,
I like when you come find these stories of like a night of holding your ground. I like these stories.
well, that's just the main part of the story. There's more.
Good.
Now, it's not as shoot 'em up bang bang, but it's interesting. So, some of the other stuff that Fred says in his book is, it gets a little off into the weeds, but here we go. So he starts off this part of the book by saying straight out that no one will ever capture or kill one of the creatures that they encountered because they are not of this world. He went on to say, quote, I know the reaction we experienced as these beings attacked our cabin impressed many with the concept of great ape-like men dwelling in the mountains. And I can say that we genuinely fought and were quite fearful, and we were glad to get out of the mountains. But I was, for one, always conscious that we were dealing with supernatural beings, and I know the other members of the party felt the same. End quote. Beck says that the events leading up to the encounter with the ape-men were full of, quote, the psychic element, and claims to have had some clairvoyant tendencies since childhood. He recounts a story of a time when he was in a pasture playing with his bean shooter as a child. I don't know what a bean shooter is exactly. I take some kind of BB gun or something.
I have a guess that I'm not allowed to say.
All right, then. Anyway, he lost his bean shooter, which he had saved his money to buy, and was quite distraught. A woman, who is insinuated to have been a spirit, came and consoled him and told him to go home and he would find his bean shooter there. Well, he went home and found it. At least he thought he had. Until years later, when he happened to find the original bean shooter laying out in the pasture where he had been playing that day. So a ghost told him to go home and manifested another bean shooter, apparently. It's his story. I don't know.
It happens.
Sure does.
It does, and you'll see why I'm saying that in a while.
All right, then.
All right.
Now, another childhood recollection he shares is of being at church with his parents and falling asleep with his head on a lady's lap. However, when he mentioned this to his mom and dad, they said there was no lady there and chalked it up to simple boy's imagination. Then he tells the story of how they found the mine. So according to Beck, in 1922, two spiritual beings appeared to the group of miners. One was a woman who acted as a comforting friend to the group. She revealed her name to them, but Fred does not share it. He only says that one of the group suggested that they name the claim after her, and so the claim contains the woman's last name. And the claim is called Evander White, so I'm not sure which one is her last name, but it's one of those. The other spirit took the form of a large Native American man dressed in buckskins. He never revealed his name, but told the men that there would be a white arrow that would go before them. One of the men, who helped find the claim but was not present during the attack, could see the arrow very clearly, and Beck said he could see it fairly well himself. They followed the arrow for 4 days through some slow-going, rugged terrain. Hank became rather perturbed by how long things were taking and began cussing the spirits as liars and saying that they were being sent on a wild goose chase. The others tried to get Hank to shut the fuck up, but it was too late. They saw the white arrow go up into the air, change direction, and take off out of sight. They followed in the general direction of the arrow until they found it again. It was hovering near the top of the north cliff of Ape Canyon, directly where they would later start their mine. Because as they got closer, they saw a vision of a large door opening, and the big Native American man came out and stood in front of the door. He spoke to the men, saying, quote, "Because you have cursed the spirit leading you, you will be shown where there is gold, but it is not given to you." End quote. Then the door closed, but it did not lock. And Beck says that that is exactly how their mine turned out. Closed to them, but not locked. There was gold there, enough to indicate that there was plenty more. But after 2 years and one Bigfoot attack, they gave up looking for it. Beck goes on in his book to talk a lot about his spiritualist beliefs. He talks about frequency and vibrations and manifestation and ascended masters and all kinds of stuff that, if you aren't familiar with it, sounds like fucking gibberish. Now, I'm not going to get into all that for a couple reasons. One is I only understand it well enough to know that it isn't gibberish, but an entire system of belief in how the world and the universe works. But I am certainly not fully understanding of that system. And two, even to explain what I do know would take way too long and doesn't really add a lot to this anyway. Beck more or less put it in to explain why he came to the conclusion that these ape men were from a different lower plane of existence than we are on. But yeah, it's a lot of, I don't want to say gobbledygook in like a negative way, but it is a lot of like real technical spiritualist shit. And, well, whatever. Now there are 3 things though that back up his claim that are more of an our plane of existence, sort of deal. So I'll share those. The first is that from time to time, they would hear that chest thumping sound during the day, and when it happened, it would follow them around wherever they went. It was much quieter than in the nighttime week leading up to the attack, but they would hear it in the day, and it would follow them around. Like, wherever they went, no matter what they were doing, it would just be there. One of the men described it as seeming like there was a little drum right in the earth and someone was beating on it. So that's something that Beck kind of ascribes to the ape-men Bigfoot creatures being on their plate and kind of watching what they're doing, and that sound was something they could hear kind of coming across. Another incident occurred before they had built the cabin. They were staying in a tent near a small creek with about an acre of moist sandbar where they would go to get water and wash their dishes and things like that. Early one morning, Hank came back to the tent and got everyone to follow him. He led them to the sandbar area and out to the middle of it. Now remember, this is about an acre worth of area, so Hank takes them to the middle. There, they saw 2 huge tracks that were about 4 inches deep. There wasn't another track anywhere on the sandbar. So whatever made that track either took a 160-foot step, made 2 tracks and took another 160-foot step off the sandbar. That's what they measured from like the grassy area to the middle of where the tracks were. Or it was dropped out of the sky, landed there, and then picked back up. Because there was just 2 tracks in the middle of this acre area. Fucking weird.
Owl.
The owl grabbed the Sam Squanch and flew him in.
Everything can be debunked. But an owl carried the Sam Squanch.
Swamp gas. Anyway, he floated in on a cloud of swamp gas. Now, the final bit to support the extra-dimensional theory is one that we've kind of already mentioned, and that is the fact that they never saw a body. They fired shot after shot at the creatures from an extremely close distance, but no bodies. The last one Fred shot fell 400 feet off the cliff and still no body. So they can either can't be killed by our guns. They managed to collect every one of their dead and get them out of there before they were found. Or they phase back to their own plane when they die. And I don't know which one it is, but they never found any bodies. Yes, Jake.
Oh, thanks for calling on me. Um, so I would have to say, I would think the first one would be the more accurate one, where they can't die by our bullets, because there's no blood. Nobody saw them phase like in and out.
I mean, it was dark.
I imagine, right? But like, if they have that ability, why would the first one be running away?
Well, so he didn't get
And
shot.
why would? What about the last one? He got shot, no blood.
But he fell.
Why not? Yeah, why not? Why not phase instead? This I'm bringing up Kelly Hopkinsville again.
Mm-hmm.
Most of the bullets bounced off them, but they got a wee little schmeckle of a glow in the dark blood
Right.
that was just gone the next morning.
Mm-hmm.
So if they were collecting their dead, they would need a cleaning crew too. Because in order for a bullet to kill someone, normally there's an entry or an exit wound.
Right.
Well, you think they got a cleanup crew?
No, see, I don't think that's what happens at all. I think that when they die, I think to get to our plane, they have to, assuming Frank, Fred Beck's theory here is correct. I almost said Frank because I was thinking Fred and Hank. But anyway.
Right.
Assuming Fred's theory is correct, and these are from a different dimension on a lower vibrational plane than we are on, then to get here would be a conscious decision, right? Once dead, they can no longer make conscious decisions and therefore would poof back to their own plane of existence. The reason I think that like the bullets have to affect them is because the first one they shot at ran away.
Right.
So obviously it thinks it can be hurt, or it would have just stood there and went, ha, fuck you, right?
Yeah.
That also was the inciting incident that pissed them off. So they took that as an assault, which means they can be assaulted. Again, not bulletproof.
Yeah, but that's pretty American. You see something you don't know, you shoot it.
Right, but then it ran away
Yeah.
because it can be hurt.
Puss.
And then they got pissed off and they fought back. The other reason is that third one, when it got shot, did fall backwards. So obviously it has some sort of physical reaction to being pew-pewed. But, if it hit the bottom and phased back to its own dimension, we can't find a body.
Right.
My only question with that theory is this. How fucking many of them was there? Because all night they were shooting at these motherfuckers. Now, they said they only ever spotted 3 at once. But when they could see the 3, they could hear other ones. But Fred says he has no idea how many there actually were. But you're talking quite a few if they're attacking the cabin all night long and taking rounds.
Yeah,
And then every time they got to get hit, they phase out and more of them take its place. It's like a whole fucking army.
Right there.
Huh?
Yeah. Hydra.
Yeah.
Kill one, head 2 more.
That's like a whole fucking army, bud.
Yeah. Osman only had to do with 4, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Huh. Unlimited Bigfoots.
All you can eat Bigfoots.
Good luck getting them on the buffet. You kill them. You gotta eat them live like octosquids.
Yeah, no shit.
But once they die, all that food in your gut's gonna just phase out of there.
Yep, just gonna go. Just gone. You're gonna be it's Chinese food. You're gonna be hungry again in 20 minutes.
I'm satisfied. Oh.
All right, buddy. Any further thoughts on the attack at Ape Canyon or Fred Beck's theory?
Is this like conclusion questions?
Yeah, that's all I got for this one.
Okay. Has there ever been any other, even a sighting in Ape Canyon or around there since then?
Oh yeah, tons of them.
All right. Almost 100 years. And also, you would think if it's reaching through and they're as hairy as they would think, you could at least find a hair. You shooting them, hair is, even if the bullets are bouncing off of them or whatever, you would think the hair would come off.
If they were of our plane of existence, yes. To me, that kind of lack of physical evidence leads me, leans more towards a extra dimensional explanation. And it did as well for Fred Beck. Now,
Yeah, Frank.
when I said that, like, that second part of the story often gets ignored, that's part of the reason why, is because a lot of people refuse to even entertain the notion that a Bigfoot can be anything more than an undiscovered, upright walking primate.
Well, look at Mount Shasta. You got alien Bigfoots.
Right. And that's not the only place that happens.
Right.
I'm going to talk about Chestnut Ridge one of these days, and that place is fucking wild too. But yeah, some people some people think that, there's more to a Bigfoot than just being a big monkey, and other people refuse to think that a Bigfoot could be anything other than a big monkey.
Honestly, though people want to think they're just terrestrial beings, you would have to assume, like, there's so many people who have claimed to shoot a Bigfoot. There's never any bodies.
Right.
Like, they'll shoot it, know it's dead, and it'll be gone, or something like that. So, honestly, it would make more sense for it to be an extra dimensional being than just terrestrial.
I would have to agree with you. If I'm going to be fully and completely honest, I think there is too many reports of just weird shit that goes on around Bigfoot activity.
Well, I'm pretty sure this is a Patreon, but Derek's story about his Bigfoot experience, where he heard, like, the over top of his head, and then heard the knocking, and then all around him, like the overhead noises and, like, crashing through the branches ahead. That's a very common thing with big feats too.
Well, there's a lot of witness accounts that talk about orbs of light before, after Bigfoot activity. The fact that they just disappear, like you're watching it walk away and it's just gone.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of stuff that makes you wonder. And if you believe in this at all, you got to kind of wonder if there isn't more to it than being a wholly physical being.
Honestly, the only thing that would, and it's not even a very good argument, but argue that they're terrestrial is, no, never mind. So I was going to say, like, locations, like, even with your Chinese Bigfoot, your Russian Bigfoot, they're always in the woods and the trees. But then you got Yetis and, like, barren ice wastelands.
Oh, that's a common misconception.
What?
Most of your Yeti sightings are actually in the valleys of the Himalayas. Only rarely do they see tracks that, like, cross the mountain tops. And the people that kind of study it have a theory that those tracks are actually just from them migrating from one valley to another. But most of the sightings, even of Yeti in the Himalayas, are seen down in the valleys where it's warmer and
where
there's trees and
trees.
Yep.
Okay, yeah. So I guess that's the only tangible argument that they're terrestrial, is that they always need trees, cover, food source.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that does indicate a physical being.
Yeah, because, like, I mean, if they're coming from a different dimension, well, I'm pretty sure they can pack a lunch.
I mean, there is the theory too, and Fred kind of gets into this, like, that when they're here, they are physical. Now, how they get here, what they're doing here, who the fuck knows? But some of them might hang out for a while. You know, you never know.
Well, you know, since we're getting into the different dimensions and all that stuff, what do aliens do here? Study, like research us, research plant life, that kind of stuff. Like everyone likes to just say they abduct us and shove things in our poopers, but realistically, how many times do people spot an alien or a UFO that's doing nothing? They're obviously getting research or something.
There's some stories of them just doing nothing, and it's assumed that their ship was broken. But we'll tell those out another day.
Yeah. A couple weeks ago, the Brooklyn Bridge one. There's so many accounts that it flew into the water and.
Oh yeah, but that could have been going back to its underwater base.
Oh yeah. I forgot they have those. But I mean, maybe they're just like geologists. Bigfoots are geologists, studying trees and plant life and.
Could be. I mean, maybe this is just like
Geology.
their version of Hawaii, and they just come here for a fucking vacation.
Yeah, and they have to be somewhat intellectual because so many different accounts, they have their own language, they're talking to each other, and they understand each other.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So they have
The
some
Postman
sort of
again.
civilization.
Yeah. I mean, they got families too. Postmen. They speak to each other. They learn.
Right?
They want to interbreed.
With Albert. Anyway.
All right. Yeah.
So there is Fred Beck's story. Let us know what you think of it. Join the Facebook group. Send us an email at paranaturalpodcast.com. Go on the website, paranaturalpodcast.com. The email is at gmail.com. My fucking bad. Yeah, any of those ways are really good ways to get a hold of us. So,
I'm 3 gnomes in a trench coat.
yes, he is. 3 gnomes in a fucking trench coat. And with that, I will say, as always, we very much appreciate you guys listening. If you enjoy our content, do not forget to tell a friend about the show. Good night.
Look out for those 7-foot bastages and good night.